I am so excited about our next guest. I got to sit down and chat with the wonderful and always charming Deniese Davis. I could sit and talk to her for days. She's just one of the smartest people I know. She has the gift of hearing a question, thinking about it for a split second, and delivering a brilliant answer that is crafted to perfection. She's also a strategic person who played competitive sports growing up. She loves the film Chicago as much as I do and enjoys the occasional Take 5, only one of the greatest candy bars of all time. We're like twins. The three-time Emmy nominee Davis began her career on the basketball courts in Vegas, crossing up her competition and bringing home championships. I do think that's where this all began, but in the traditional sense, sure. She began her career producing short films, music videos, and digital content, which included Issa Rae's acclaimed web series The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl. Davis went on to serve as co-executive producer of the HBO comedy series Insecure. Davis also served as producer on A Black Lady sketch show and executive producer for Rap Shit. Davis is also the co-founder of Color Creative, a management company dedicated to supporting diverse creators. And she launched Reform Media Group in 2020 as a means to produce socially and culturally relevant television and film content. The company focuses on amplifying marginalized voices across the entertainment industry. Just recently, Deniese Davis and her Reform Media Group banner entered into a development deal with Tyler Perry Studios. This includes TV unscripted first-look feature film projects with the goal of bringing more diverse storytelling across both television and film. And here's a fun little side note. It is super rare for Tyler Perry Studios to enter into deals with other creators, writers, producers. I believe Perry only has one other deal like it. So bravo to both parties. He clearly has great instincts because I would bet on Davis too. You're a very smart person. Like when I can watch your interviews all day long because it's truly like a masterclass in storytelling, like just from like word of mouth. Like you do such a great job of connecting dots and having complete thoughts and communicating them very well. Have you always kind of been a storyteller?
You know, I guess in some way it's funny. My life was one of those things where once I got started on this journey and you look back at your childhood, you go, oh yeah, oh, that makes sense, right? Like you just forget about these hobbies and interests and things you do as a kid that didn't, I think at the time, translate or connect to any type of career, right? I always joke that recently, maybe a year or so, I went back home to Vegas to my mom's house and I was in the garage and I was cycling through like, I don't know, some old like storage unit thing that I kept. And in there, I found like an elementary school journal, might've been from like 5th or 6th grade. And, you know, they'd give you like a question of the day you'd have to write about. And one of them was like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I was astounded because apparently I wrote that I wanted to be a writer. And I laughed. But I laughed because I was like, no, I don't. But it was also like, oh, actually, but at that time, it makes sense. I used to want to write my own, or at least I did actually write my own short stories and come up with characters. And I would like, you know, I love to have this creative imagination. And, you know, it's just so funny how life works, right? When you don't even realize that you were just a kid having fun.
Yeah. Well, that's crazy. And it makes sense because you as a producer are extraordinary. And I find that producers who are creators who understand narrative in themselves versus just understanding like bottom line and the business of it all are truly like a force multiplier on set. Like you do more than your X, like than what your role on the call sheet is. You grew up in Las Vegas. Did you like, you know, you wanted to be a writer in this journal, but there was entertainment on your radar at all in any capacity in Vegas while you were growing up?
I mean, only by way of the normal stuff. You know, I watched a lot of movies with my family growing up. A lot of this content. I always like to say I'm part of the digital age, right? Of knowing what life was like before and after computers and just that world. So, not in particular. What's really ironic though is I do have videos there where I used to take my mom's like VHS camera, so to speak, these big DV tapes, not even mini DV tapes, 8mm tapes, I think. And I used to do these short films or music videos with my friends and my cousins, like over the course of a few years. And I would edit in camera, like literally if you watch them back, you see like 4 jump cuts because it's like I kept rewinding the tape to try to like get to the next scene. So again, all in retrospect, not in the context of like, oh, this is what I want to do, but I was around it. I think I was around being supported creatively that I think led to so many other things. And I think if you knew part of my story, you know, it's ironic that at 16 I was introduced to the craft in a more formal way, and I fell in love with it, right? It clicked. And obviously it should have, because prior to that I dabbled in all these things, but no one had actually ever sat down and said, oh, you can do this with this craft, with this tool.
Yeah. Well, that's what was this? Do you remember tonally, like the things that you were interested in making when you were making those videos, like what the tone of them were, the theme?
Yeah, absolutely. They were comedic, honestly. I had two younger cousins who were like, I don't know, 7 and 5 at the time, 6 and 4. And I used to pick them up after elementary school and walk them back to our house and watch them until their mom got off work. And so if you watch these videos with them, I'd make them play brothers in the short, but it was almost like they weren't getting along. They actually played very mature adult brothers, because I gave them like grown men like problems. But it was comedic. Like if you watch it, it's very much me trying to like tell them what to say or tell them what to do, and shooting them around the apartment. But it's funny because it did lean to a comedic side, as did some of the skits and stuff with my friends. Because we just were silly, right? You're young and you're just having fun with it. Never any of the content was anything dramatic, which is very strange.
Did you, what were you watching at this period of time? Like when you look back at your childhood or early, like even high school, what sort of media was most influential to you?
Beyond a doubt, movies. I grew up loving movies. In my household, there's, my family at least, there's classics that we could still put on to this day that I don't get tired of. It's very eclectic. Like people always love to be like, what's your favorite movie? And I'm like, I can't even choose. And then I start being like, well, there's Chicago, but then there's The Quick and the Dead, and they're just like, who are you? But it's just, I grew up having a fondness for all types of different stories that, just kind of swept me off my feet. And yeah, it's just, again, with the translation into the digital age of things, it's so funny because I distinctly remember when video was becoming a play online, and not even in your phones, because we weren't really able to do that yet. But I don't know if you remember this, but before like even Chris Crocker videos, right? Because that really kicked off the YouTube age. There were these like random videos that people would send to you via email, and it was like this scary woman, and like you'd be watching a video of a room, and then all of a sudden like the sound effect of a scream would come on and someone would appear. And it would like freak you out. And it's almost like the effect of the early movie days when people would go into theaters and watch a train come at them, right? Like you were just like, what is this?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was via email, but it's just like those, I think the nuances and video and the things that I remember, or just being drawn towards. And then also being like, how do they make that?
That makes sense. I mean, I can see how you have this wide range in taste. Chicago, by the way, what an amazing film.
It's a classic.
Richard Gere.
True story. Someone knew I loved the movie, and so for my birthday, they took me to see the play when I lived in New York. And I was so bored. I remember being like, this is nothing like the movie. Because the movie just made it so much more like bombastic, right?
Yeah.
Like it's incredible what they did with that.
All right, so we can't go much further without having to talk a little bit about basketball. I know that's a through line in a lot of conversations, so we're not going to hang on to it too long, but I am really curious, like, I've heard a lot of conversation around it. How would you describe the way you played basketball? Like, what was your style like?
It's so funny. I played basketball like the way I produce. I was very strategic because, it's so funny. I was a point guard. I was always like captain of the middle school or the high school teams. But I knew I wasn't the best player on the team. And I instinctively knew that. And I think it speaks a lot about filmmaking, right? Like as a producer, I'm not the director. Like I'm not going to ever speak as if I know better than anyone here. And for that, basketball was so collaborative. And so, I think I approached it. I loved the game. It just genuinely was the most fun sport I'd ever played. But I think, when I think about how long I played for and why, a lot of it came from the team experience. I loved being a part of a team. I loved doing things together and being able to, then have to honestly never even ask to lead these teams, but for that to be thrust upon me and for people to see something in me that I didn't see in myself at the time, because I was like the pipsqueak. I was tiny, short, really decent, right? Decent enough to be on the team, but I wasn't a superstar. I didn't score 20 baskets every game. I would maybe get 6, but I think I saw the floor and the team and the game strategically every time, and that went a long way. Plus, leadership skills. I think the coaches really enjoyed that. I was really good at rallying the team and having that camaraderie. So it's so funny. That's how I see myself as a ball player. I truly haven't played in so long, but again, you get more into your life and you're like, oh, that's so interesting. There's no world in which that time in my life, those skills that I was learning in that sport didn't translate or move over and help me into what I do now, and it's just because of the type of player I was.
I can see that. Just hearing the conversations, that makes a lot of sense. And every time I heard someone bring it up, I'm like, but what kind of player were you? And it makes sense, that it connects the dots to everything else, because everything I've read from a producing, you're extremely collaborative. You create, I'm fascinated with sports psychology, specifically around player coaches and the modern era of coaches who really play around the personnel and get to know them, and it's a very 360 philosophical kind of approach to coaching versus the old coaching of the day, where you would say, this is my style, my system, get into it, if you don't like it, leave. Versus really getting to know your players and on an emotional level and find the best chemistry, and that's the team you go with, who has the best chemistry with later on the floors. Makes sense.
No, completely. And I was lucky enough to be on teams where we didn't have a Kobe, right? It was genuinely a team that was really great and we won championships and stuff, but we dominated because we played as a team. Everyone was good. And so I think it's that effect of everyone here is pulling their weight, right? We knew what each of our strengths were, and it wasn't just one star that we're all trying to support and cater to. And so even that environment, was really telling.
That's cool. Did you have good handles, I can imagine?
I did. I definitely, as a point guard, you'd have to bring the ball up the court, call the plays. I distinctly had good handles. I had a decent shot. And again, I'm always just I was an average-ish player. I was good, but I wasn't great, And I have a fiance who, she also grew up playing basketball. And so every once in a while we'll play a one-on-one. And honestly, she beats me every time. And I'm always wow, you're really good. Makes me feel was I good ever? Was I just the mascot?
Start questioning everything.
Yeah, you're just why'd they let me on the team? What? I must have been good at one point. Who knows?
I think it's that vision. As older I get and I love sports, I really see the value of players that have vision on the court, who actually can see the plays unfolding. And to your point, being strategic and growing up a strategic person, producing, playing ball, you're seeing problems come in advance and you're getting ahead of them, and then you're seeing opportunities to actually amplify the game or the project. What's a better film, Love and Basketball, Above the Rim, or White Men Can't Jump?
Oh, Love and Basketball. Are you kidding me? What kind of question is that? What kind of comparisons? Love and Basketball, and I'll tell you why. It's as many great things as that film is about, and the acting and everything. What's important to me out of all of those films and any others, if you look at the history of films about basketball, right? It is the first film and one of the few films with a Black woman in the center of it, where she's also the player, right? And it's always male dominated in every story. And so it was, for as a young girl playing ball, that's what you saw yourself in that, you know what I mean? And we haven't really seen that since in a fictional way. So it's always, it feels like it's always shown in the male case, but to me, it's also why that film, I'm are you kidding me? It's a classic, it's a love story, it makes you cry, it makes you laugh, it's all these things. But representation wise, man, we never had that until that point, and we still haven't had it since.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. Yeah, is that that theme and that kind of subject matter, are you active? Have you thought about trying to find the next Love and Basketball?
I've actually toyed around with it. I've been really interested in the doc space, particularly around the idea of women's basketball and women of color, because I think there's a lot of great stories about to come out, and you hear about all these projects, and they're incredible ball players, but none of them are actually Black women. And I think, when you look at the WNBA and beyond, and in the history of college sports with basketball, there's just not a lot of stories that have been shined a light on. So as much as I am interested in a fictional approach, I've been more looking at how do I help tell some of these stories that have just been overlooked, and that, the community, at least by and large, know about them, but it doesn't feel like it's the greater public is even keenly aware that they existed.
Right. And it's such a great format to tell that story in a very authentic way, right?
Completely.
And then you can find source material in those productions. You started on it a little bit earlier about how you kind of made your transition in high school into audio video visual AV club, if you will, in high school. How did you get into that? How did and what happened? Like what exactly happened to get you into that class?
Okay, so it's twofold, right? My sophomore year, I'm in a class. It wasn't even AV club. I'll tell you the name of it because it cracks me up. The name of the elective class was Sports and Entertainment Marketing.
What?
I know, right? I should ask Coach Collins, who taught the class, like, where did this name come from? Because that's not at all what we did. We had textbooks, but my sophomore year, it's the first time this class has ever been held. It's an elective, right? So it's like the class that I took to be like, well, what's that about? And what it quickly became was it's the class where like all the cool kids or like the kids who were just like, whatever, I need to take an elective. We just hung out. Like they would do some schoolwork, but the man who ran the class, who was also the head of student council, was just like the coolest teacher ever, right? Everyone like loved him, and we'd go to McDonald's and be like, bring me back some fries. Like totally that kind of class. But long story short, we're in there and there was some work every once in a while. I would catch up on homework or sleep. And there was a small group of students in that class that were from student council, and they would go next door where when you peeked into it, he had a green screen and some cameras and some computers, and basically was like, we're going to use this class to start doing these broadcast announcements. And so it's like the morning announcements that every school would have. Well, somehow they were able to convince the principal in the school to like try to roll out this visual announcements every day. And could we get every classroom, every teacher to turn this on in like fourth period and broadcast it to the kids? Like this would be a greater way to get messages out there. So they started doing that in this class that I took as an elective. So I was watching what they were doing and was just like, well, this is so interesting. Like what is this, right? I struck up a friendship with one of the women who was like the co-host, and she, through our friendship, she ended up kind of establishing me more with the teacher. And one of our class projects in that class, the only thing for assignment was like, we have to do a photo montage. And so I remember taking these photos and like being on the computer and showing the editing of it. And she was a senior, she was graduating, and she was like, hey, I told Coach Collins that you should be a part of student council. You clearly have an interest in this. And again, people seeing things in me that I was like, huh, me? Oh, I guess I am creative. And because of a recommendation, he came to me and was like, hey, and I think I tried to run for council, I didn't get in, but he was like, I'm going to bring you in as his representative, but I'm going to be able to do this class again, and it's going to be called Sports and Entertainment Marketing 2. So people can retake the class, and you should come back and you should be a part of this. And so I did, and throughout my junior year, strangely, or I guess not so strangely, through that class and being able to be a little bit more closer to what they were doing, he was like, okay, here's how we edit, which is Adobe Premiere Pro, and we were doing green screens, and somehow by my senior year, I'm directing and producing and editing our daily video announcements, and became known as like the video girl by the time I'm a senior, where you had the dance team who was like, hey, we are going to do a dance recital. Can you do a commercial that can air during the announcements? And I'm a part of student council, so we would always talk in the student council meetings of like, Denise, let's do a video about the blood drive that's coming up. Can we do a commercial for Sadie Hawkins dance? And like, all these random creative things, and literally would be here's the concept. It was like, go do a video, and then I would have to sit down and be like, okay, well, it'd be fun if we did this, and this. And I did the school registration videos that would go play, that the counselors would go take to the 8th grade classes in the middle schools and get them excited about coming to the school. Like wild pet projects and creative freedom, even a couple music videos. I took one of the girls in student council, and around campus we shot a music video for an Ashley Simpson song at the time, and I got to air it. I got to air it during the announcements. I had my own platform. So, anyways, that's truly how I got into it. It was through school. It's why I'm a big advocate of education and exposure, even before college. It's just it changed my life, and honestly, it wasn't until it was time to college that I didn't even. Again, I connected the dots and said, oh wait, I can go to school for this. Like, I'm just having fun, and I never thought about where this could take me. And the more I saw that there was this industry for entertainment and people doing these types of things, the more I was I wanted to know about it. And so I saw college, because I always wanted to go to school, as a way to like take it more seriously. And not that I wasn't, but it was just like, I'm just doing this because, but no one's actually telling me anything about what I'm doing, right? So that's essentially how it happened. And I'm always grateful, because I'm like, just like, high school is a weird place, man. It just, it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre.
Well, that's incredible. I mean, you put in so many hours before you even graduated high school in this career. I mean, honestly, if you took the hours of like business relationships, one-on-one talent relationships, pitching ideas, pitching people on and getting them buy into an idea, like you're running a network essentially. You're writing, directing, producing. Like you got, I mean, every one of those categories, you had hundreds of hours, but by the time you went to college, and that's incredible.
So funny. I was going to film school, or I just decided to go to film school. So I'm going to college knowing I'm going to major in film. And honestly, I felt like an imposter. I remember feeling very insecure about what I was coming into, because in my mind, and when you study the greats, I was like, God, they just were making films all their life. Like, I'm just like doing these things for school, right? And I don't know about the greatest American movies and cinema, and I don't know truly what some of these roles are called. And so I went into it assuming that everyone else would know, because it felt so new to me, even though I'd been doing it for a couple years, in terms of deciding that this is what I wanted to spend my time learning about, that I felt late, and weirdly, right? Because you think back and you're like, well, why would you do that? Because some people just decided they were going to major in it and never even looked into it, right? But for me, I just felt like, because of being in Vegas, I'm not from LA, right? So I didn't know anyone, and I truly hadn't looked at the craft of it, and I was going to school to learn it. So I kind of went in insecure and feeling like an imposter. And I think what helped ground that was I love to learn. I love the classes I was taking and learning about, or putting all of this into context finally. And, I got a book called So You Want to Be a Producer, because as I was getting ready to go to New York and go to school, I remember feeling like I had to go into the classroom or go into this program, at least identifying what path I wanted to be interested in, because I just was like, at least that'll give me something to go off of. And so, through the research of like, what other people on set and looking at what everyone did, through the process of elimination, I was like, oh, editing, yeah, I've done that. But wait, people edit, that's all they do? I can't do that. Writing, I don't have the patience, and like, it's just like, that's probably not my thing. Directing, don't want all that responsibility. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't passionate about like that being my craft. And then the role of a producer, which, to be honest, I say I was writing, producing, and editing, but I wouldn't even say I think at the time I was calling myself producing those announcements. I didn't know that that's what that was. Mm-hmm. But coming across that definition, it sparked something, because I saw it as half creative, I saw it as half business and all these other things. And then going and researching this book, and wanting to learn more about it, that really is what changed it for me. It was called So You Want to Be a Producer by Lawrence Terman, and reading that book made me go, yeah, I could do this. This feels very much aligned with who I am, but also, I always joke, but it's doesn't sound that hard. like it wasn't like, I gotta be the best director, I gotta be I gotta know science and lighting for certain. It was just like, I just need to know how this works, and I need to be able to be in the mix and be able to help champion and I don't know, put all the strings, tie all the strings together, right? Yeah. I could do that, like it was just like, and why couldn't anyone do that? So, anyways, it's what I decided on, and I went into my freshman year just and being able to tell people that when they're like, well, what do you do? And I was like, well, I want to be a producer, and people would be like, no one wants to come to college to be a producer. Like, how it is. I don't know if you've been in a film school environment, but it feels like everyone wants to be a writer director, and then you find the little DPs. But then outside of that, it felt like I couldn't. Yeah, I was like an anomaly in this class.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then it goes back to you playing basketball and being a point guard, like seeing all of it all makes sense. It all connects. And like, I see the connective tissue of you, like seeing the floor, the vision, and seeing that with creative projects, that it's, of all the jobs, I do think it's one of the most difficult ones. And even though you're like, oh, it's the easiest, it's like, it's tough, because you're really,
it's hard. It's hard. Don't get me wrong. I say
hard.
That now I'm like, no, I admit it's hard. At the time I was like, I didn't know anything.
Yeah. But like it's true. I could see how you as being a point guard and seeing the strength, into your point earlier about being strategic, seeing the strengths in everybody else, and like, oh, you in this role, talking them into that role, like kind of getting everyone aligned to get the best out of what you all are working on. I can see how coming from a leadership point of view from sports and can set you up for that, and it all makes sense.
It all makes sense somehow. Yeah.
Do you remember how So You Want to Be a Producer came across your path?
I'm going to be honest. It truly, I think, was a Google search of like, what are the books about producing? And I think I probably bought that book more than any other, or I think I bought a few books at the time, but that book in particular, because when reading who the guy who wrote it, I mean, he had produced all these classic movies, and it was just like, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And it's weird because the title itself, So You Want to Be a Producer, it felt like, oh, he's talking to me. Like, yeah. Okay, this is what you want to do. Like, this might be the thing you need to read first. So that's truly what it was. And I'll never forget cracking it open. Like, I started reading it on the plane while I was flying from Vegas to New York to move there for college. Like, I started it then and was like, oh yeah, no, this makes sense.
So let's connect the dots a little bit with like how you went to AFI, correct?
I did. Yes, I went to grad school there.
And how did you connect the dots to your next thing? What came after college? What was your first thing following graduating?
Undergrad or AFI?
AFI.
AFI. So the first thing after AFI, there were two things I did that summer, really three, that all coincided. But I had already made the decision I was going to go be a freelance producer. Digital was just exploding the year prior. YouTube was investing money. So it was just like this new industry that just felt like, oh, I can go work there and everyone needs the skill set that I have to offer. So that decision led me to applying for a web series that was looking for a line producer, and it was paid. And I was like, great. And a friend forwarded me the job posting, and I sent in my resume, and I got an email from a woman named Issa Rae, and I met her for coffee, and she and I clicked. And later that night, she was like, great, we love you. We'd love for you to start next weekend. And so and I genuinely remember having coffee with her, saying how I was graduating in 2 Wednesdays. Like, I was like, I graduate in 2 weeks. I'm going to be fully available. Like, so it truly was the first thing that overlapped with my departure from AFI. So I got hired to do that. We were shooting it on the weekends. The other thing that ended up happening is at the time I was producing some other shorts, but I was approached to do a short through the AFI Directing Workshop for Women with a woman named Sarah Shapiro, who was an incredible writer-director. And she knew a friend who was a cinematographer that was in my graduating class. And so they connected us. And she had this amazing short about a woman who was working on a Bachelor television show. And she was like, and it was so smart and so funny. And I remember meeting her and being like, what do you want to do? And she's like, I'd love to make this I used to want to do a movie, but now I want to do a TV show. And I was like, well, I love the short, and let's just go figure out how to make it. And so I did that in that July of that summer. And Ava Prokofsky, who later ended up coming in to shoot Insecure, this is how her and I first worked together. She was the DP on that. And that short film, Sequin Rays, ended up at South by the following year, and that became the show in Reel. So I also did that summer. And then the last thing is, I remember, again, talk about just the world, but a friend gave my resume to a friend, and I get a call, and they're basically like, hey, would you come in for an interview to be an assistant to this really big director? And I was like, I'm kind of like producing stuff. I don't really want a job, and that's kind of like the not the job I wanted to take. But I'm always a believer in opportunities, and at least always taking the meeting. I was like, at least take the meeting. I don't have to take the job. So I take the meeting, I go and sit down with her and the director, and it's really great. And we wound it up, and I'll never forget, I was on a late shoot the night before and had walkies in my trunk and was like, I need to do all these returns. And so I go back to my car, and she's like, hey, wait, before you leave, he really likes you and actually wants to take you down to the house, introduce you to the interns, and just get you a feel for the space, because his office was in his home. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, we can do that. And so we go down, and he showed me around, and was like, and this is there's a space. And he was like, so what do you think? Could you start next week? And I was like, can I get back to you in 24 hours? And I think I took him by surprise, mostly because I was like, well, time out. This was not, I'm very strategic. I was like, this is not in my car. I just took the interview. I didn't think I'd get the job. And he gave me 24 hours, but I think he was, again, he was a very prominent film director. So it was almost like, who on earth wouldn't want this job? And I went home. I returned the walkies, went home, and called my mom and called some family and friends. Was just like, am I crazy? Should I take this? And I don't know. It's not like I got all these other things. I'm producing Awkward Black Girl on the weekends, and I didn't want a job, but like I could use the money. And again, I was like, you know what? Why not? I'm curious to see where this goes. And I gave it 90 days because I was like, I'll go into it, try to do what I can on the weekends, but at the end of the day, in 3 months, if I don't feel like this is for me, I'll leave. And I took the 3 months and had a great experience and made some friendships and relationships out of that, that I'm still close to today. But ultimately, 90 days later, I was like, this is not for me. We came to an understanding, and I got him a new assistant, and I left the job. So I went back to freelancing, but it's not a story I share often because it was so short. But I think, when you ask, like, what did you do after graduation? Those three things compounded pretty much all at the same time. And I still got to choose my destiny, right? I still got to choose my journey. And I'm always grateful for that because I know had I not chose it or just kind of went with the ride because of like the opportunities and how they were presented, I think I would have ended up with a very different career probably. Who knows?
100%. I mean, and I think one thing that you can see throughout your career from a very early age was you have good instincts, to make because I think that strategic mindset of thinking through what's the long version of this instead of making like quick gut reactions, you really think through it and you give things opportunities, and then you see, okay, I like this and I'm going to take that into my next thing, and I didn't like that, so I'm not going to do more. I'm going to do something different. And I think that's a common thing that I've seen and I've read through your interviews is that you have incredible instincts.
Oh, thank you. I mean, look, I think I operate by two guiding principles that I can probably verbalize now, but one of them is always to follow my gut, right? But always to do what I wanted to do and make sure it was what I was happy with, because I came to realize that over the course of my life, the decisions I was able to make for myself always ended up, I was always happy with them because I knew why I was making them, versus I think throughout our lives, some people have the knack to listen to some people and want to do what they feel like is best for them based off of the advice they're given, right? Or what someone else wants to do for them. And I know a lot of people who just ended up in unhappy situations, or they end up, years into a career they never loved because someone said it's what they should do. And so I always just made sure whatever choices I made were my own and wanted to own that, whether good or bad. And I think the second thing was always knowing and feeling that there's nobody who has any control in this life, right? So, and what I mean by that is, what's the worst that can happen? I can take this job and quit in 3 months because why not, right? Like, it's like operating off the principle of like, I am sure of myself and the directions in which I want to go. But I think some people get stuck and they kind of get like bogged down when they have to make those hard choices because they are worried about what people will think. They're worried about the reputation. They're worried about, well, what if I ruin this like just all these things, and it holds them back. And I've always been like, I'd rather take my losses, but at the end of the day, I'm going to figure it out anyways and do what I want to do. And so I think those two things have served me well. And honestly, it's only until maybe recently in the last few years that I've been able to look back at this trajectory and see those moments, but also, again, be able to put them in a way where I'm like, well, why did I do that? Oh, Deniese, it was because you always just did, not that I just did what I wanted to do, but I've always followed my own, my own instincts, my own gut, for sure.
Yeah. Well, when you break down those instincts and those gut reactions, strategic people see a million variables happening simultaneously. They see a lot of stuff happening in the movie, and it's like, so it's not like it was a quick reaction. You thought through it. You had you saw like what your long-term goals were, and you saw how this opportunity fits within that. And I'm a big fan of experiences, a lot like kind of what you're describing with taking on that role. Even though like, okay, I could quit. I want to have experiences, and especially if it's a new one that I don't know about, like I'll dip my toe in and be like, oh, I actually don't like that, but I'm glad I did it. I'm glad because now I know I don't have to like regret, like, did I make the wrong choice? Because if you would have not taken that opportunity, you might think 5 years down the road, like, should I have done that? And
Yeah.
now you know.
Now you know it wasn't meant for me. It's so true. It's just like, there's, what do I say? If there's no risk, there's no reward, right? And so just being fearless and saying, what's the risk? What's the worst that can happen? And every time I've taken a risk, somehow it's paid off in ways that I would have never thought it did, but then it's just been like, oh, okay, I should keep doing that. I should just keep like gambling on myself and trusting that. And again, it's not always been right in terms of like, oh, okay, well, that didn't go well. They didn't think that was going to happen. But somehow it's brought me other things that, I get a chance to be grateful for having done it.
Yeah. Well, sounds like a pretty, especially coming out of AFI, that there was a lot of opportunities ahead of you. How did you connect the dots from that point of time to Insecure TV show? Like, what were the beats in between there that really, in your mind, when you look back, what connected all those dots for you?
A lot of it was I had worked with Issa a lot from the time I came in Awkward Black Girl until she got Insecure picked up. And that time span between meeting her and then when we were on set doing the pilot was about 3.5 years. And so in those 3.5 years, I was building a relationship with her and working on a bunch of stuff. But at the same time, I was a freelance producer. And so I was on so many sets. I was, also when I wasn't producing something to just collect a check, I was still a PA. I would still take on a production coordinator job, like whatever freelance production gigs existed, right? And so, I was getting all kinds of experience in terms of being in those environments, but then also building all these relationships. And so by the time Insecure comes around, there was that little imposter syndrome again of like, I've never made a TV show. But then at the other side of it, once you get into the trenches, I was like, oh, I know this world. I know this world so well because it's all I've been in for the last 4 or 5 years since grad school, since undergrad, right? And so it almost felt like all of that led up to, I think, boosting my confidence and being comfortable being on a set, and not feeling green and not acting like I didn't know what was happening. There was a learning curve, but the biggest thing that I think was awakening for me was that, these low budget, these shorts, these like web series stuff, it's no different than this big HBO TV show, and the way of which how it's made, right? Production is production. The people it's still a collaborative team, whether you have 5, 10 people or whether you're on set with hundreds of people, it still operates that same way. It's just the process in which you do it is just a little bit more expensive and a little bit more, a little bit more pressure, but the mechanics are the same. And so I think the dots and getting there, truly helped me build a level of confidence and a level of stability where I felt like, oh yeah, I've done enough to be able to be here and prove myself, but then also it's not that scary. And I'm really grateful because obviously it was such a big deal. It changed my life, but I also think as someone who might have not had all those experiences on other sets until then, I might have walked in there like a deer in headlights a little bit, or, and just been a little bit more prone to not speaking up or kind of being in the shadows, whereas, I was just so comfortable in how I was moving because I was like, I know this space. Like I've lived and breathed it now for years.
Yeah, you put the hours in, right? Like, so to your point, like smaller shoots or smaller web stuff or music videos, the difference between that, a TV show, a huge feature studio film, is just the scale of how the dollars are spent. But the problems are similar, right? Like as a producer taking care of problems that come up on a daily basis, the ones that were on the smaller projects come up on a bigger ones, and they're just, the scale's different. And you're like, oh, I've done this. I know how to solve for this.
I know. Yeah.
And so those experiences matter.
It's so true. Yeah, it's so true. And again, it wasn't like, wait, what's a one-liner? What's a schedule? How do we talk about it? Like, it was just like, oh yeah, I've done this. I've been on Scouts. I know all this, right? So it was like I was able to just, jump into the problems and help however I could versus spending that time being there to learn,
Yeah, no, that all checks out. I had Nina Erb on the podcast a couple months ago.
I love Nina. That's right.
She's incredible. She was, so brilliant. And the thing I've always been fascinated by is like the culture on a set. And she just spoke so highly of the culture that you all created on that project. Are you really proud of that?
I'm extremely proud. There was nothing like it, at least that I had been a part of prior, and a little bit since. But it was a very special place. And I think it shows just from the low turnover we had with like the cast and crew and the same people who wanted to come back. And it was supportive. It was like a family, right? But also just a place that you walked in and you almost like was able to let your hair down a little bit because you were like, oh, like I'm not the only one here on set who looks like me or who maybe comes from where I come from or just, all of these things. So it was an incredible environment. And, I credit so many of my fellow producers and everyone else at the top for just making sure that was there from the very beginning.
I love that. Now let's talk about, your future, like moving forward, right? Like you've got some amazing projects happening. You've launched Reform. Like what was the intention behind that? What was your goal with starting this new company?
Yeah, so, I'm really excited about Reform Media. At its core, right, I've been with Issa for so many years, kind of helped her with the production company, Color Creative, and all these things. And, I think during the pandemic and around that time, I very much reflected on my own career and where I've been coming from, what I've done, but also the things I wanted to do. And, obviously I know I could have stayed and had a place to do that with her, but, I was very honest with myself about where I am as a producer and almost forgetting or realizing like, oh, there's an opportunity at some point to figure out what that means on its own, right? Because I think the majority of my career, even going back into my freelance days, is being a producer for hire, producing for everyone who needs someone who thinks like me, who moves like me. And that's incredible, right? To be needed in that way. But I was really curious about whether or not I could do that for myself and not necessarily do that for other people. And so the only way to find out is to say, well, what if I just launch my own company? Am I ready? Could I do that? What would that look like? And that just kind of really started to excite me. And so, I, again, strategically went into it saying, well, I can do this in another 20, 30 years because my intentions were to go old and gray with Issa, or there might be this unique opportunity just given where the landscape was, seeing how it's changing during that year with the pandemic and saying coming out of this might be the best time to try to go and plant my own flag and try this. Because if there was one thing that was very telling is that in the course of non-writing producers like myself and production companies, I felt strongly that, well, there's not a lot of Black female-led production companies that are producer-led. That's not talent-led, director-led, showrunner-led, right? There's a lot of those pods, but I was like, I look at Kathleen Kennedy's and the Galen Hurds and the Stacey Shears, and like, these are people I idolize, and I'm like, and the Deborah Martin Chase, but I was like, but where are we as a young Black female in this generation? And so the time felt now, and took me a few months of going back and forth because, again, imposter syndrome, and also the idea of like, am I crazy? Like, who would give up this incredible job I have? But again, in my heart and trust in my instincts, I was like, I know this is what I want to do. So I had Issa's support, and I set on a path to figure out just how I was going to do that. And so I'm a year and a half in. Full disclosure, I always think of last year being kind of like a starter year because I'd launched the company, but I found myself in production for 11 months between Insecure and Rap Shit. So it wasn't truly until the top of this year, once I came back from Miami after shooting Rap Shit, that I was able to kind of dig my heels in the sand a little bit and give my full-time attention and energy to Reform. And so 9 months in, I'm incredibly proud of where I'm at and just rejuvenated. And honestly, it's like a really great feeling because I think I was in the same place for so long that I was like, oh God, this feels like another chapter in my career, in my story of my life, right? I'm like, this is the wild, wild west, so to speak, because I have no idea where it's going or where it's going to end up, but I'm really enjoying what I'm doing in the moment. And I know regardless of what happens, it'll be for a reason, right?
It all makes sense. Like hearing like the past and like the early childhood, I mean, from like having the little camcorder videos and making stuff with your cousins to like high school, college, it all makes sense to where you are right now. You seem really like focused on, creating great content, being in service of the audience in a lot of stuff that you do, but also being in service of your community and making change and creating change in this industry, which needs it, right? How do you, like, when you're looking at projects, what are you gravitating towards right now? Like when you look at material, when something comes across your desk, what makes it like, I'm going to check this out? Like what is grabbing your attention?
Yeah, great question. I found that it's kind of two things, which is one, the voice. Like I love something that is written in such a way where I'm almost like, I need to get to know this person. Like this, their voice and their instrument and the way they see the world is just jumping off the page, like first and foremost, right? And that comes from sometimes just the first page, and you're just like, oh wow, this is a very interesting writer. And as someone who's read thousands, probably thousands of scripts in my lifetime, I promise you, no script is ever the same. So it's just one of those things that just immediately hooks me. So that's one. And then two, obviously, it's the story in its entirety, right? And really being stuck with it. My favorites are the ones that, first of all, I get into it and I'm just like, I have to read this in this one sitting. Like I can't just stop it because I genuinely need to know where it goes. But then more importantly, it's the ones that I finish and like I think about it at night, I think about it the next morning, and I'm just like, like, and I'm anticipating and looking forward to meeting that writer or that filmmaker because I'm like, oh my God, I have so many questions. Like I'm so curious about this and where to come from and who was this, and it's the ones that genuinely kind of just take me by surprise. And some of them, I used to like to say it's like, oh, I love stories that are like I haven't seen before, which is a little bit of that, right? But it genuinely is the ones that I think are just smart in their approach, and it's also why I say that I love all stories. Like as I build Reform, people are like, "What's your niche?" And I'm like, "Everything. I love everything." And it makes it more fun to kind of get lost in another world in that way. So it's just again finding the scripts and the material or the stories that I'm just like, well, this is whether it's challenging or easy or it feels familiar. Even it's just like, oh no, this is fascinating. Like the way they did it is I can't even put my finger on it. So it's those stories. If you had to come up with the word for that, I'd applaud you because I would use that in a heartbeat. Yeah. But it's it's just a little bit of who I am and what moves me, right? I'm not even trying to like do any kind of agenda or mandate here in a big way of like checking boxes or like trying to like focus on one thing or another. It's truly just saying, I just want to tell great stories. I want to tell the things that as an audience member, I can become a fan of. And then more importantly, see myself as being an instrument to help someone's vision come to life.
Yeah, that makes sense. How many things are, have your attention on your calendar on a weekly basis?
I recently counted because I had to. I'd say there's roughly 13 or 14 active projects in development. And what I mean by acting, it means they are currently being pitched, already sold into development, are or currently set up somewhere and hopefully on a track to get made in the next year. So that's like that. And then I always look at this other second pile of here are the things I truly really love, I want to be a part of, I want to do. We just haven't yet engaged or really kind of like figured out the next steps. And that probably is only like a handful of things, maybe 5, 6, 7 scripts. And then no big deal. And then I leave the rest open because I'm very strategic. There's that word again. Of how I'm going about building this slate and building like the projects that the company's taken out and really trying to make sure I'm not cannibalizing just one genre either, right? So very much saying, okay, I took on these, 13, 14 things that I know are in actively development. Let me make sure anything else I'm taking on new basically doesn't step on any of those toes because I want to make sure my slate is as diverse as it should be in terms of all the different stories and things that I could be doing with it.
When you look at the slate and you look at these projects, what gets you excited most as a producer? Is it like, like we've talked about the mandate, or not the mandate, but the vision of the company, but as a producer, as you're looking at some of these things, is there a particular thing that you're like, I want to try something that I haven't done? And is that unscripted? Is it, a feature? What's the thing that's most interesting to you right now?
Sometimes I get really excited. It's like I'm jumping the gun here, but I get really excited about like, I know the conversations that this could spark. I know the emotions that this could evoke, right? It's almost like I get excited about knowing how much people can connect to the story. And also knowing how much like an audience might desperately need a story like this, right? So and that could be a doc, that could be a movie, that could be a TV show. But those are the things that I think keep me galvanized and passionate about seeing something through because it's just like, again, I connect with it on a human level and everything pushed aside, because I know it's going to be great. I know the filmmaker's going to be great. Like I know all those things. That's my job. But what gets me most excited is thinking of how it could impact people.
That's beautiful. When you look back at your career and you look back at what you've done so far, what is something you've learned the hard way?
Ooh, great question. Something I learned the hard way. I don't know, because I learned a lot of lessons. Come on, Dwayne. The first thing that popped in my mind, I guess, when you asked that is, the thing I learned the hard way is that you can't depend on everyone else, to be honest, right? I think, and especially in the beginning or just throughout, you tend to make a connection, or you're like, oh, okay, like, and I very quickly learned this, but it's like putting all your marbles into someone else and being like, oh, this is going to be the thing, right? And so, and I just learned that by people not following through on something they were going to, or promising something that they weren't able to, and just being able to understand that, at the end of the day, you have to be careful where you put your trust in people, but also just the idea of not relying on everyone else for that.
Yeah. No, that's a tough lesson to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
You brought this up throughout the conversation, and it's a thing I'm actively trying to actually build a curriculum around, because as I've talked with, people in the Page program, upcoming storytellers, whether they're performers, directors, producers, whatever it is, the one thing that I always have to try to convince them is that they can do the thing. And oftentimes, and that might be in a project that's like with somebody who's, very good and has accomplished and tons of credits. And it's still at a certain point, they kind of don't believe they can do this one thing. And so imposter syndrome is real. And so I'm actually trying to come up with like a white paper, a curriculum that can start like at a high school level. And so I've been asking everybody in this last year about imposter syndrome, and you've brought it up on your own, and which I love. So do you still battle it, and how do you cope with it?
Yeah, it's funny. It comes up when I've always been at my most life-altering decisions, and most recently came up, like I said, a couple years ago when I was going back and forth about whether or not I should go and do my own thing, right? And so, how do I manage it? That most recent experience actually taught me a lot of it, because I think it was probably having so much anxiety and really just being so conflicted about what I was going to do, and having that honestly wrapped up in fear. And so, when I think about imposter syndrome now, I recognize and realize so much of it is fear. It is obviously the idea of, can I do this? Am I capable? But behind that, when you think about what's the emotion that's making me feel this way or making me think that way, it's the idea of resisting and being afraid of what's going to happen, being afraid of perception, being afraid of all these things. And so I kind of had to unpack that and say, okay, well, how do I get past fear? What has Denise done in her life to combat that? And the most obvious choice of it was always like, Denise, you've never been, you've just done it. Like, you've always, and I think I give a lot of credit to my mom, who tends to remind me of that, where she's just like, you've kind of walked your purpose on this life, where you've been like, it doesn't matter what you can say to you, what anyone else thinks, you're going to do what you want to do. And I've always, operated on that. And so to be reminded and be able to be like, yeah, I have been fearless at several times in my life. And how was I being fearless? Well, it's because I had that confidence in myself. I had that confidence in the decision. And so to go back to the imposter syndrome of it all, it was like, okay, I'm just going to have to face this. And guess what? I'm just going to have to make a decision, because the longer I hold on to this, the more I'm going to sit with this illness that's truly making me sick. And I'm not trying to make this up, but it's just like finally making that decision, finally like having a conversation with Issa, finally being able to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm doing. The relief was immediate. Right? It was just like I didn't hold on to that the rest of the way. It was just like, okay, now I'm going to get to work. And so it's just like this funny imaginary wall that we run into that, for me, it had to come from like going to battle and saying, yeah, no, you just have to do it. That's how you've gotten past all of these things. And so, I hope that helps answer your question, but
100%.
Yeah.
You just created an incredible subtitle for it, the imaginary wall. Because it's truly what it is.
It's true.
And once you get over it, it's gone. You don't even remember.
No, literally, you get over it and you look back and you're like, it's not even there. Like, it's so bizarre, because it's this fleeting feeling and moment that you have, but it's so real. You know what I mean? So, and that's why it is like a wall. It's like a bad dream, because it's just like it happened and you know what's happening, and it's paralyzing, right? And what I found, and dealing with it most recently, was like, oh, but this also hasn't been the first time, and it's probably why I've dropped it a few times in this conversation, because it's like recognizing, oh, I've had these moments over the course of my life to date, and how did I get past those, right? And so just kind of making sure that I carry that with me, because I have no doubt that, given where I am today, that somewhere in the future I'm going to run into it again. Like it is something that, is not that I don't think you can get rid of necessarily. I think it's just something that happens to all of us depending on where we end up in our lives.
Yeah, no, I think that was so brilliantly said. I mean, that was so eloquent. The idea that was like, oftentimes I found with imposter syndrome are people who are constantly putting themselves in new situations. It's like there's a trait, like the types of people who have it are the people who are constantly pushing their own boundaries. And that's the thing. There's tons of people who don't ever have to deal with it because they just have done the same thing over and over again for their entire lives. It's people who find themselves in these new positions and new rooms and new conversations, bigger projects, bigger things that are like, oh, I have to overcome this. And it's, by the way, it's just totally imaginary. Last question. I'm curious, what is your comfort food? When you've had a really bad day and you're like, I just need to have this. What's this?
This is going to sound crazy. It varies. It changes. I go through phases. At the moment, it has been, it's been like a really good cold glass of ginger beer. It's not even it's not even a comfort food, but it's just like the sweetness, the fizziness. Like I love the taste of it. But prior to that, my big go-to comfort food was like Kit Kats. And, when in high school it was Take Fives. Like it's always been something random where...
Oh my God, Take Fives are so
Take
good.
Fives or Milano cookies. Like honestly, but what happens is I become kind of addicted and it's like decomfort food and I do too much of it and then I get sick of it. And then I couldn't tell you, I probably haven't had a Milano cookie in like 20 years, but it was like a part of my life at one point. So go through phases.
It was part of your identity.
Oh, completely. And then once they get recycled, they don't really come back. So.
Well, I love that. And by the way, ginger beer, is that something like, were you into that before or is that a totally new thing?
Not gonna lie, I got into ginger beer when I became a whiskey drinker years ago because it's like my favorite cocktail mix. And then I started drinking it without the whiskey, and I was like, God, I like this. And so now, I mean, it's not, and it's honestly, it's to me, it's a delicacy because it's not like I can go to a restaurant and order it, right? Like it's not like Sprite. So to me, to be able to like come home and sit in my fridge and like crack it open, it's just like, this is so delightful. Like this feels special because it's not something that is wildly available wherever you go.
Right. Well, I love that. And I loved everything you've said. And I really appreciate you going a little bit over here. But most importantly, making the time to do this. Your story is really important. Your story matters and it makes a huge impact. And I appreciate you taking the time to do it. So thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Dwayne, and being patient with my crazy schedule. And I'm super excited to have done this. So I appreciate all the wonderful questions and just like the beautiful conversation.
Well, thank you. Good luck with everything. I'm sure our paths will cross in the future. And have a wonderful day. Thank you so much again.
Of course. I hope so too. Take care.
Bye, Denise.
Bye.
That's a wrap, kids. Thank you for checking it out. And be sure to follow Reform Media on Instagram at reform.media. I think this is the best place to see what Denise is up to. You can also check out our Instagram at the Smith Society Pod for the latest news. And we will be announcing some live events planned for this summer. So please stay tuned. Finally, the best way to support this podcast is to rate and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow your dreams, no matter where they take you.